Welcome, critters. I'm Clara Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plot lines, characters, and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. This particular episode is about Campaign 1, Episode 30, Part 2, and joining me today is Petall and Atlas again. Party
Hello.
episode. The icebreaker for today, well, let's introduce our costumes first, and then we'll get into the icebreaker. Petall, go first. You're first on my screen.
Okay. I was going to be Wirt from Over the Garden Wall, but I couldn't find my hat. So I improvised and I'm wearing official Critical Role merch and am Sprinkle from Campaign 2.
Excellent. I mean, everyone loves an Om theme. Impromptu costume. Atlas?
I dug through my Renaissance Fair box and found a tiara, so I'm a princess because I wanted to wear the tiara.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, I am a woodland nymph fairy something or other. The fairy costume is actually from high school. I'm shocked it still fits. And then I found this garland in my apartment, and so I wore it. I was like, sure, let's add it on there. These grapes keep poking me in the face, but we're gonna just, roll with it. The icebreaker for today, since we forgot it last time, is if aliens landed on Earth, who would you recommend they talk to?
It's a very good question. It's a very difficult question. There's a lot of people I would not want aliens to talk to.
That's the easier one to answer.
Yeah. I'll go first. My answers were either Bill Nye or Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Those are good answers.
I feel like they would be good ambassadors for the human species.
I feel like along the same lines, like the Hank Green, John Green duo of science guy and humanities guy would be a good combo.
They would be a good combo.
Absolutely.
And you guys had really good answers, and I'm still stuck on who I wouldn't want to talk to aliens.
You can answer who you wouldn't.
Well, I just think most politicians would not be a good option. They're always in media where aliens come to Earth and they're all bring me to your leader, and they do, and I'm like, it would just go so badly with most politicians.
Yeah. That's why I went with people who would actually understand things.
Yeah.
I mean, I would support Bill Nye as the ambassador for the human species in most situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well. So please comment, like, share, and subscribe. And ready? All right, let's dive in. So, as we open this episode, Alice, take it the lead.
All right. When we come back from break, we start by splitting the party. Vax and Scanlan head off to do some early morning scouting, while the other four find their way to the alcove, all under the cover of Scanlan's seeming spell. There's a brief discussion about whether they should have a different disguise today, since one of the people lived, even though it was without a tongue. But it's determined that the discussion happened too late, and even more new people in town might raise more suspicion, so they proceed with the same seeming as they had the day before. Vax and Scanlan proceed with their father-son act, Vax choosing to take a fairly abusive drunken approach this time. As the crew move through town, they do note more energy than they had seen in previous days. And when the group of four arrives at the alcove, which is an arcane boutique that Percy is familiar with, the door is open, though the shop appears rather unkempt. There are enchantment books scattered around as if being referenced, and a young girl is staffing the shop. When Percy asks after the proprietor Simon, they are told that he was called away to a special project by the Briarwoods several months before, and while he used to visit, it's been more than a month since he was seen. The girl, it turns out, is Jordana, Simon's daughter. She gets nervous when they ask if Simon would have chosen to work for the Briarwoods and makes a point of calling the Briarwoods fair and just rulers. She then closes the door, making the very fair point that they are strangers, bringing up very dangerous topics. She offers them a couple healing potions and an immovable rod, but Percy turns them down, instead drawing a Derolo symbol in the dust on the wall and quickly wiping it away. They start to bargain for a place to stay for the night, but manage to raise suspicion that the Briarwoods are after them instead. Vex makes the argument that the Briarwoods are really after everybody, and Jordana concedes that anything is better than the current miserable state of affairs. They try to convince her that they know a Derolo or two by telling her Percy's full name, but their versions include Percival Sanchez Vicario, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and Percival von Ussel von Liechtenstein, among others. So she remains rather unconvinced until Taliesin says, Simon Wisk was a good friend to Percival Frederickstein von Ussel Kowalski de Rolo III. Percival lives, and he is coming. Unfortunately, at this point, the audio cuts out for a bit, and we don't get to hear her response. But when we do come back, she is gifting the group with several healing potions and the immovable rod. So we can assume that Percy managed to persuade her. They ask to stay the night, and she leads them to a very small back room that is covered in dust, but contains a bed and likely belonged to her father. Her final bit of advice is to speak to Keeper Yennon, one of the social centerpieces of the remaining good folk in Whitestone. Percy uses the earrings to tell everybody to reconvene at the ladies' chamber when they're finished. At this point, we return to Vax and Scanlan. Scanlan is disguised as a young boy, and Vax is dragging him down the street by his ear. Vax stops a young man in the street and awkwardly asks where to get a drink. The young man points him to the journey's end a couple of blocks away, and Vax continues, dragging Scanlan along with him. When they reach the journey's end, it is fairly empty, with only 2 employees and 1 patron around. Vax orders a drink, and Scanlan tries, but is given water instead. The lone patron is not happy to be interrupted. He was studying a ledger and appears to have been crying at some point. Vax commiserates briefly about how there's no way to make a living in Whitestone, mentioning that something has to change. The patron mentions that people can't even leave by dying. They're simply brought back and have to keep on going. He says there's no escaping this misery. Either you try and stay alive and exist in this bullshit, or you die and become one of them. Scanlan jumps in to say that he heard from a fictional friend that there are rebels about who caused the fire the day before. Vax pours ale on his head, but the patron urges him to let Scanlan speak. His curiosity obviously piqued. Scanlan reiterates that there are strong people who took out someone in the big fancy house, and they're coming to free the people. Vax starts fake weeping into his cup, and the patron mentions that he hopes these saviors are better prepared than the last ones. He's confused when Scanlan doesn't know what uprising he's talking about, and is derailed by Scanlan's excuse that he doesn't know because Vax wouldn't let him out of the closet at the time. He stops to say, first and foremost, you've got to treat your boy better. Going to raise up someone no better than the motherfuckers running Whitestone right now if you keep this up. Vax pretends to pass out, and Scanlan begins to make their apologies and leave. As he does, the patron tells him that he should tell someone if he's ever hurt again, and also that he should tell any other rumors about a savior or an uprising to the man at the bar, because there's a group that would rather go out fighting than keep living as they are. An insight check from Vax tells us he's interested but not convinced, so as they're leaving, Vax suddenly sobers up and tells him Paylor has returned, which gets the patron interested enough to tell the man at the bar what he's heard. And now I'm going to turn it over to Petall.
Everybody reconvenes at the ladies' chambers, where a group of roughly 25 is listening to a hushed sermon by Keeper Yennon. The group sits in the back, trying not to draw attention. The sermon suggests that people should show support for the allies that have entered the city and ends with a general prayer in Celestial. The people file out silently, and Vex tries to memorize what faces she can. Percy catches the keeper's eye, and he leads them to a building in the back. Keeper Yenin has spoken to a number of the community leaders, and they are unconvinced as this isn't the first rebellion that's been attempted. Without a solid plan, they'd be losing people for nothing. Percy inquires about the failed rebellion and learns that most fell to the dangers of the castle, and any who survived found a familiar fate at the Sun Tree. Yenin also reveals that there is an informant within the castle, though he does not know the name of this person. Yenin has heard that the Briarwoods have been rebuilding whatever is below the castle, and we get our first rumor of the ziggurat. Yenin takes a moment to share the lore of the Sun Tree, that it grew from a seed planted by Petall, and that may have inspired the digging beneath the tree. Here the party is joined by an old man that Percy recognizes as the former chancellor to his father, Archibald Desney. Scanlan hands over Sir Carrion's notebook as proof that they mean what they said and intend to turn the tide. Archibald appreciates the gesture, but maintains that they will need more than that to defeat more than the defeat of one man to prove what they say. Scanlan drops the seeming spell on Percy as he removes the hat of disguise, and the book hits the ground as Archie recognizes Percy. They share a joyous reunion, both surprised that the other has lived. Archie has renewed energy, telling the party that with Percy they've got 2 Derolos to head a rebellion, and that must be enough, as the Briarwoods are nearing their goal. Percy's sister Cassandra also survived the attack and was taken as a captive of the Briarwoods to be used as an example. She has been feeding information to those willing to rebel, but has not been in contact in weeks. Archie promises Percy they will gather a militia and asks Percival and Vox Machina to lead. They are surprised that tales of their travels have reached Whitestone, but Archie assures them that some news has made it from Iman over the years. Percy thinks he has a place to start and inquires about Professor Anders. It's confirmed that Anders lives in the castle with the Briarwoods, and one of the 2 remaining mansions belonging briefly to Dr. Anna Ripley. The 2 noble houses are now held by Duke Vedmeyer and Court and Count Tyleri. These are the men who helped the Briarwoods take Whitestone, and the noble houses and responsibilities are assumed to be part of their reward. If they are going to continue sending messages to gather people, the particular sadistic Tyleri would be the logical choice, but the more time they spend on this kind of pursuit, the more the castle and the Briarwoods themselves have time to prepare. The party asks some fact-finding questions as they start to plan, determining that the mists are a precursor to the undead, the green fog is some kind of unknown byproduct, and Delilah is unlikely to be a vampire, but her husband sure is. Percy suggests creating a distraction at the house of the person they don't intend to hit next, attacking the second house, and then using the anticipation of the attack on the third house to surprise the castle instead. They debate the benefits of employing the Derolo crest against the risk it poses to Cassandra's safety. Keyleth offers to skywrite and make it particularly hard to miss. They start to talk about how best to cause a distraction, and Scanlan works to convince them that he can take care of it on his own. Percy points out the house Scanlan should target on a map as it begins to rain. At the last minute, Keyleth tries to join Scanlan, but they collectively convince her to join the larger group. Percy puts on his hat of disguise back on, and the party heads out, Scanlan branching off to a different house. When he reaches it, Scanlan notes 2 guards before turning into a dragonfly and buzzing his way into the house. He doesn't find an entrance, but sits and waits for his cue from the rest of the party, who are casing their own house. The house is sturdy but dreary, and there is a single guard patrolling outside, and the implication that there may be more guards patrolling inside. There's a brief negotiation over the earrings about whether the attack should be simultaneous, and the larger group agrees to wait 30 seconds for Scanlan to kick it off. Scanlan, drawing on his bardic tales, turns into a triceratops. He crushes the guard in front of the door and destroys part of the house to get into the foyer where the guards start rushing toward him. We shift back to the other house where Vax uses his assassin skills to drop one of the one visible guard before turning to Grog and inviting him to play. Grog takes this as an invitation and barges through the gate toward the front door. The rest of the party scrambles to find positions, heading towards the back with the idea to meet Grog somewhere in the middle. Poised on the edge of two battles, the episode wraps up for the night, to be continued.
So this is one of my ultimate favorite Scanlan moments, for sure. But before we get to that, I want to hear your thoughts on their interactions in town, because these are also very important, the interactions that they're having in the second half.
Yeah, I think for me, the part that caught me the most is the realization for Percy that Cassandra is still alive.
So
That is such a big moment, and really, I think, I mean, it gives him lots of emotions. It gives him that like spark of hope that he's not the only one, but I imagine it also lays on the guilt of leaving Whitestone.
yeah, and I think Taliesin actually tears up. I think I saw him wipe his eyes during that moment as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I also love that he kind of doesn't really address it. He's not prepared for it. He's not hoping for it. So he just moves on for now, and we'll see it kind of play out a little bit later how much it actually means to him. But his first response is shock and an inability to process, which feels so real because it is just,
Yeah.
that's the kind of news that you can't hear once and actually believe.
Exactly. And especially not when you're in the middle of another stressful situation. Like it'd be one thing to like hear it in like a time of peace and like where nothing else is going on and you actually have time to like sit with it when you first hear it. But right now they're planning a revolution. There's this level of urgency to stop the Briarwoods before whatever it is that they're doing beneath the castle. And like there just isn't the time to stop and be okay, she's safe, especially when she's not safe. She's with the Briarwood, she's alive, but that doesn't mean that she will remain so, especially once the Briarwoods realize that Percy is here and might potentially start using her to get to him and all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the rest of the group reacts much more strongly than he does in this moment. And it's heartwarming, but it's also understandable why he would be reserved in this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it does affect his entire motivation for being here and whether or not he's willing to survive this thing that he's gotten himself into. Like we talked last time about how he has a bit of a fatalistic view and how he's not really into the whole survivability of this.
Yeah.
And having a member of his family be alive changes that so much. It changes a lot about how he's viewing what they're currently doing. And that has to mess with his head, and he's not in a place where they can deal with that right now.
It would also probably mess with his, because I bet like he was planning on going there like guns a-blazing, quite
Yeah.
literally, and
Yeah.
just like burning the whole
Yeah.
place down. But if his sister is there, that adds a degree of caution that he needs to have. He can't just throw himself away, as you were saying, and just cause rampant destruction everywhere. Like,
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
it so much more nuanced, so much more layered. Like it's not only a bombing mission now, it's like a extraction mission as well,
yeah.
which means that they have to be very careful with how they go about that.
Which I think is also part of why the rest of the party responds better to it,
Mhm,
because they were already planning something like that more
mhm.
than Percy was. He was ready to do whatever it took to get revenge, whether there was collateral damage or not, and they were less on that page. And I think this is more in line with what they expected to be getting into, so they are more prepared for the kind of complication that it now presents.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I think even the conversation that they have with Jordana, is that her name? Uh, is also very important important as well, because they are learning how to, again, negotiate this attack more so than just come in guns blazing.
Yeah.
There's so many more people to think about as they go about this than just Percy.
Yeah.
I also think that Vax and Scanlan's conversation in the bar is kind of an important insight into the fact that a lot of people have kind of given up and need a little bit more to jump into a revolution. Like, this isn't their first time. They've been burned by it before. And so if they're trying to get the people behind them, they need a really solid case that is hard to argue against. And they're going to have to do more than they thought they would to get the people behind them, which I think shows a lot of mindset. It takes us outside of this little group of rebels to, what does this mean for the rest of the city? What does it look like? What kind of PTSD are we up against? Like, there's so many complications here that they're learning about in this first part of the second half that take their very noble plan and make it messy.
And I think it also gives it parameters too, because before this was like a big unwieldy thing. They're like, how do we even go about this? Like, how do we start a revolution? How do we infiltrate the castle? How do we get rid of these noble houses? And so they were relying on this old, just like attack and destroy kind of mentality before, but without really much direction behind it. It was very chaotically applied. But now they're given more parameters, they're giving more direction of being like, all right, this is a better path to take, instead of having so many options available that they're just choosing the most destructive route by default.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I also want to point out, in the bar, I really liked that, I mean, even though it was just an act by Vax and Scanlan, that the bartender like called out Vax for his abusive behavior of his son.
I
I
mean,
think
that's
that
their bad,
shows
right?
that, like, I mean, it was just a good moment in general to show like that, like, the goodness that still exists here. But I like that the like implication that even though like this person in particular is kind of feeling hopeless at the situation at large, that like there's still like some standards in some ways that he feels like he can change things and make a difference. He's not like indifferent because everything's terrible and so of course this is terrible. He actually like calls out Vax for it, even though it's not real, it's all an act. It's just a moment that got to me there.
I mean, it's humanizing, right?
Yeah.
Like before, we were talking about the people of Whitestone as this other entity. And now we have faces, we have names, we have personalities, we have values, we have morals to attach to this mass of townspeople that we were trying to save.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good place to highlight the way Matt's DMing this episode, because he is trying to curb some of their more violent and impulsive tendencies and remind them that this is a living city, that there is nuance here. But he's doing it in a way that very much makes sense with their story, with their characters. He's not, overtly trying to control anything, but he is steering them in very subtle ways to be taking this more moderate path, which is a skill that he is very good at. But I like how we see it in this episode of him trying to direct them to make specific choices or take a more moderate path, or kind of change up this chaotic feeling of what they've been doing and get them working on an actual plan that can move forward.
I mean, that's the importance of having like an empathetic DM, right?
Yeah, like to me, it seems like he's very much picked up on their feeling a little lost, a little overwhelmed by it, and he's giving them what they need to make a story that works, and that fits with the character goals, but also fits with the story he's trying to tell. And like that, he's such a master at that particular part of DMing that I love watching it every time it comes up, but he does it so well in this part of this episode.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's so many D&D groups out there that just want to punch and kill and destroy and level up and get the magic items and, do the whole, like, powerful being quest thing. But both the group and Matt have come into this as using it for a tool for understanding the human experience more so than just a game for the sake of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between the mechanics of D&D and having a really good DM that turns it into something more that's actually really exciting to watch and to play. And to make it into something that's worthy of a show, you have to go beyond the mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, that's the lasting impact of Critical Role. Why it has lasted for 9 years at this point in time is because it's more than D&D.
Yep.
Yeah,
In ways.
they really lean into the story aspect of it and the role play aspect behind it and like the purpose, like when there's combat, like combat is a big part of it, of course, but there's like purpose behind the combat.
It's so funny when I try to explain why I'm so obsessed with the show to people who have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm like, yeah, it's a D&D stream, and they're like, Dungeons and Dragons? And I'm like, yeah, but it's voice actors, and like, they get into it, and it's just like really good stuff. Yeah.
It's collaborative storytelling more than it is D&D. D&D is just the guidelines that they're using. It's more of an improv show than it is anything else, but they do it so well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, that's also why, only to take a slight tangent, but also like shows like Dimension 20 do so well, is because they're all improv actors, and uh yeah, Critical Role does much the same.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they have such lasting impact that they do. Like, because there's a bunch of D&D streams that come and go, that are like one shots or just don't have that lasting power that these two shows have. And it's just so funny when I try to explain to people like why I still do this podcast. I'm like, but it's worthwhile. You don't understand. Well, personal experiences?
I think what it comes to, like what it reminds me a lot of, is that when I've gone through like difficult periods of my own life and just like, I don't know, just the way that they're navigating like the difficulty for the people to get hope, but like that there still is hope. You just have to go at it the right way. It just kind of really reminds me of like what it's like to deal with like mental health issues and stuff like that. Because with mental health issues, like there are coping mechanisms for that work. There are like ways out of it, but it's not going to be an immediate fix. It's not the same answer for everyone. It can be really like overwhelming, and it can be really easy to get into a hopeless state with all of it. And so it's just like just that mix of like hope and hopelessness, and both being like very real and present and valid. It's just like reminds me just a lot of like mental health, or just what it feels like to go through like a difficult period of time in your life.
Yeah, like you said, there is no one way to travel through these experiences. Like, what I'm taking from it is like attacking problems creatively.
Yeah.
Like especially the whole Scanlan Tricerat, like that's ultimately like one of my favorite Scanlan moments of all time, because he's like, no, I'm good. I can handle this. And like realistically, any of them could have played that role because they all have different abilities that would have been able to create a distraction but I think Scanlan is the one who's most willing to be creative with the abilities that he has. And he's just the perfect person to run through something like that. And like sometimes you need to attack your problems with the Triceratops.
When in doubt, Triceratops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Scanlan, especially in the last part of this episode, is super interesting because he's so insistent that he can do it himself. Because he knows that he can, like, he doesn't have a plan, but he knows he can do it because he knows what he has. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's all it takes is if you know you have
Yeah.
a certain skill set. It doesn't matter if you have a plan about a specific problem. It just matters that you have confidence in what you know. And
Exactly.
that's what Scanlan has.
Yeah. Yeah. He has confidence in his ability to roll with the situation because he knows exactly what he is capable of, which is inspiring. Like hashtag inspo for that one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Definitely makes it fun to watch.
absolutely. It was a
Mm-hmm.
good scene. The Triceratops was a good scene in the animated series as well.
Yes. They did that one well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any personal experiences, Alice?
I think the thing that came to mind was trying to make complicated decisions. Like
Mm.
you've got lots of options. There's probably a couple that are fine, but how do you actually choose? And the paralysis that comes with that, especially as you get more and more factors. And I just kind of really felt like Percy was going through that in this episode of just
Yeah.
like, he knows in theory what he wants to do, but actually making the right choices to get him where he wants is overwhelming and complicated and frustrating. And yet he's just having to make choices because there's not time to wait.
Mm.
And I found that extremely relatable in very, very frustrating ways. Um, but just like having to make spur of the moment decisions without all of the, consequences laid out and not having no time to actually think about it. It's a very weirdly relatable thing. Thankfully, not in terms of life and death stakes, but in terms of just like things that have long-term impact on life is just I was very aware of how Percy was feeling for most of this episode.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. He's our little sad angsty boy right now. Man.
Yeah,
He's so stressed and I love him.
I know. I love a good redemption arc, man. Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
Percy just sticks in my head. Sometimes I just like, that like Tumblr meme about rotating a Blorbo around in my head. That's what
Yep.
I do with Percy sometimes. Sometimes like Percy's just there and I just think about him and what a great character that he is and just rotate him around in my head.
Yeah. One of my upcoming characters for my books is definitely Percy inspired. Like, there's a lot of Percy influence in one of the upcoming characters. Like I actually went to his playlists on Spotify, like the Critical Role Vox Machina
Oh, I
playlists.
listen to those all the time for all the characters, all the campaigns. I
Yeah.
listen to those all the time.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, it changes. I've actually like burned them as CDs so that I can listen to them in my car because my car is too old to be able to like hook up my phone to it, but it has like a CD player. I would say my usual favorites, the ones that I enjoy the most are the Percy ones,
Mm,
the Vax ones, the Caleb ones,
mm,
the Jester ones, the Orem ones. I also and FCGs is also really good. I think Liam O'Brien and I have very similar taste in music because for every campaign, like I've got like a handful of CDs that are my favorites,
yeah,
and like his characters always make the cut, and I think it's just because Liam O'Brien and I have similar tastes in music.
very fair, very fair. Jester number two and Caleb number two are my
Nice.
go-tos.
I have Percy number 3 in my most listened, so
Yeah, yeah. Caleb number two, that playlist got me through some shit.
A good one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, what are we gonna take? What actions are we gonna take?
I think it's just kind of like a reminder for me as I like go through life, as I was talking about with the relations to like mental illness and stuff like that. And in some ways, I'm doing a lot better with like mental illness than I was in the past, but it's something that like most often never truly goes away, and you still have to deal with it, and it
Mhm.
comes in waves, and healing's not linear. And so I think sometimes I get frustrated when I hit a patch of mental illness stuff, and stuff that worked for me before in the past doesn't work in that situation. Much like, like people tried the rebellions and then they didn't work, and you have to try to come at it at a different approach. And so I think it's just a reminder to me that like when I do hit those patches of like difficulty with mental health, that there's like still a way out of it, and it's okay if what worked before doesn't work now. And like it's okay if I'm like feeling helpless and struggling, and that there is like a way out of it, even if it's not obvious to me.
Mm-hmm. And like, speaking of the whole rebellion that didn't work, is like sometimes you need people to join your rebellion in order to.
Exactly. I'm very much a person who tries to do things on my own. I've got a lot of trouble like asking for help when I'm struggling. And so I think, yeah, it is exactly a good reminder to me that like when I am struggling, like let people know, ask for help. Don't just try to figure it out on my own.
Yeah, that was honestly one of my biggest aha moments with my therapist a few years ago. Is like, I've always very self-identified with Buffy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I've recently started watching that. I've never seen it before.
And it's always been like, she's alone in the world and she has to fight her fights alone. And then I realized that the reason why she breaks the Slayer cycle is because she has friends with her. And my therapist was like, yes. And I was like, oh, people. Right, right.
Yeah. For me, it was one very specific moment that Petall actually brought up earlier of that the man, like he's the patron in the bar is so frustrated and broken down with his own life, and he still takes the moment to help somebody else. Of like, even if you're struggling, that doesn't mean you can't do good in the world. And I think that just focusing on that idea can help alleviate some of the stress of being in a bad situation. And so focusing on the good that I can do versus my own situation, and trying to turn it out towards someone else, is something that I think I can see being very helpful in many ways, but also just like that was a very impactful moment for me, and sounds like for Petall as well, of just like this guy takes a minute to do good, and it's not a ton of effort on his part. It is just making sure that somebody else knows they're not alone, but it means a lot to the people who are listening. So I would like to do more of that.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, lately I've been embodying my inner Bard and being like, all right, how can I approach the situations, the problems, the scenarios that I run into on a day-to-day basis with full creative potential of being like, how can I respond to the situation, not in a pre-programmed way necessarily, but knowing that I have creative choice in how I respond to a situation. And I think that that's just like the Bard way. So I'm taking a lot of inspiration from Scanlan at the moment.
Yeah. He's a good one to take inspiration from, especially at this point in the campaign.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, womanizing, that kind of stuff. I'll leave that.
Yeah.
Triceratops, yes.
Be so
Living
nice
that-
if we could turn
that's-
into a triceratops in real life.
Man, yeah.
Yeah.
Embrace your inner Triceratops. We should have had the dinosaur costume for this episode.
I know.
I know.
We didn't think.
I forgot that actually turned into a Triceratops this episode. I thought it was the beginning of next one.
I thought so too. I was like, oh, they're gonna like end before it starts, and then we'll talk about it next episode. But no, we got.
Yeah, I remembered this episode ending like right after the Cassandra reveal, and then picking up with the dinosaur on the next one. But I guess that the battle picks up on the next one. But yeah, I had that thought.
Yeah, I mean, we do see a fair amount of Triceratops in the next one, to be fair.
Yeah.
He does his Triceratops thing, and it is chef's kiss. But we'll get into that next time. So these are powerful themes that we're talking about. And audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights and stories with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role episodes like these have impacted you in your own lives. Special thanks to Petall and Atlas for joining me for this party Halloween episode. It's been a pleasure.
Always fun.
Thanks for having me.
So next time we'll be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 31, Part 1, and one of you will be joining me. I forget which one at the moment. We'll figure that out. And as always, I'm always looking for more co-hosts and guests, so if you're interested, hit me up. In the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below, follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR for all the juicy updates. And until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and be the chaotic good you wish to see in the world. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.